Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're going to give everybody just one more minute as everyone comes in. Hope you're all well. Please feel free, as you're coming in, to introduce yourselves in the chat function, in the chat box, so that we know who you are and where you are joining us from. Okay, a very good morning to you all and welcome to a Tech Tribe Community Masterclass. My name is Tarisiro and I will be your host this beautiful morning. Please, as I've mentioned, please feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat. Let us know where you are dialing in from and what your business is about. Hello Mpo from Johannesburg, Zuko from Gauteng, Busisiwe from Centurion in South Africa. Welcome, welcome, welcome. I hope you're as excited about this session as I am. I think there's so much to learn here from Amazon Web Services, and we've got a very special guest here with us today. Welcome Samuel from Kenya, Steve Biko from Namibia, Zintle from Joburg, Murray from Joburg. Welcome to you all. You're welcome to continue introducing yourselves in the chat just so we have an idea of who you are, where you're joining us from. As the Tech Tribe community, we understand how entrepreneurship can be a very daunting and lonely journey. And this is why we are very privileged to partner with Amazon Web Services to host a series of classes on how you can use the AWS tools for your business. And joining us this morning from AWS is Veliswe Boya. She's a developer relations advocate at AWS, and she will be discussing the tools on AWS that can help you to build your MVP. So before I hand over to Veliswa, if you have any questions throughout the sessions for Veliswa, please pop them in the chat or in the Q&A box, and then we will go through all of those together towards the end of the session. So over to you, Veliswa. Thank you so much for joining us, and very, very excited to learn more about AWS, its tools, and how we can build our MVP.
Thank you so much, Tarisiro, for that introduction. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'm very excited to be here. Hi, everyone in the chat. Hi, everyone who's joined. Thank you for joining. So before we go into the talk, I'd like to just get the introductions out the way, then we can move on and talk about why we actually are here today. So like Tarisiro already said, I'm Veliswa Boya. I work at AWS. I'm a developer advocate. And what do developer advocates do? I work with the developer community of AWS. And a weird ask I always get from startups when they're looking for developers, they always come and ask me if I have anyone. I'm not really resourcing, but I know a lot of developers, so I can help you find those people if you want that. I'm based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I used to be an AWS hero before I joined AWS. That's another story for another day. We can talk about what that is and how it happened and what does it mean. I am on social media. You can find me. I'm on Twitter and I'm on LinkedIn. And the AWS developer community of Sub-Saharan Africa, which is the region I look after, we've got a couple of communities, and this is where we meet. And this is where, again, you could meet those developers that you're looking for. We are on Slack. Anyone can join, and you can start engaging there if you'd like to do that. And that's the link to join our Slack workspace. And we've got meetup groups as well throughout Sub-Saharan Africa, where enthusiasts, AWS enthusiasts, get together and they share knowledge. And it's a great place for networking. We have user groups in Cape Town, in Pretoria, Johannesburg, Kenya, Nigeria, Ghana, Cameroon, and we have one that just opened in Benin. And this one looks after the French-speaking community of Africa. When things went online, all of these kind of fused into one, but now that things are slowly going back to in person, you will see these being very distinct meetup groups throughout. So that's me as a way of introduction. What are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about tools for building your MVP on AWS. Um, you'll see on that little laptop that I have there, I have a couple of startups that I've built on AWS throughout the world. We've got Airbnb has built on AWS, Monzo, Segment, ZocDoc, but bringing it closer to home, we've got some Africa startups that have built on AWS. I don't know if you know of any that you maybe, if you're comfortable, you could share in the chats. But I know of Aerobotics. If you've heard of them, they use drones to help crop growers, get more yield. They headquartered in Cape Town. It's an Africa startup built on AWS. I know probably you've heard of Paystack, which is the modern online and offline payments system. It's an Africa startup built on AWS. You've probably heard of Sensor Networks. It's also headquartered in Cape Town. They do IoT hardware and software for insurance companies. So that's before we go into the talk, startups that have actually built successfully on AWS. So we're here to talk about MVPs, how you could build these on AWS. Before we go there, what is an MVP? An MVP is a minimum viable product, and this is the first product that you will build as a startup. It's the product that gets your startup through the product market fit phase. So you would build this and you would put it out there as soon as possible, and you get that feedback from your customers very early on to find out what are the features, are they actually working, are they meeting the need of this customer that you're actually building for, because ultimately that's why you're building this product. An MVP is not a prototype, and with a prototype you would typically be testing a very small part of a problem. An MVP is not that, but later on we will take a look at what is a prototype and how does it actually play into the MVP space. There's a saying by Reid Hoffman, who is a co-founder of LinkedIn. He says, if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you shipped too late. So what this actually means is that your initial version should be very minimal. If it's not minimal, it means you've shipped too late. It means you've taken so much time working on this feature and overworking it, and by the time you've put it out there, it's too late. You should be embarrassed when you put it out. You should feel uncomfortable, like, oh my word, is it actually, should I be sending this out there to the customers? So minimum viable product. And we talked about minimum viable product. We can also talk about minimum usable product, minimum lovable product, minimum testable product. All these play into the same space. Minimum viable, we've already talked about that it should do just the one thing, minimum viable, just good enough to be able for your user to be able to work with it. When we talk about a minimum usable product, we're talking about you optimizing for getting the product in your customer's hands early and getting the feedback. So your minimum usable and your minimum viable are very similar. When we talk about lovable, what are we talking about? This is when you are building a product that is competing with a product that is already out there and very much loved. So an example would be you are building a new banking app. There are so many out there already. How are you going to make sure that the customers switch over to your product? So that would be your minimum lovable product. When we talk about a minimum testable product, this is when you are optimizing for a thing. And when I talk about this, I like the example of Airbnb. When Airbnb put out their first MVP, people were saying there is no way that people are going to be happy with renting out their homes to people they don't know. So when Airbnb put out the first MVP, they were maximizing to test for this. So that was a minimum testable product that they put out. So these are the various variations depending on what you're actually looking to do. It could be either viable, usable, lovable, or testable. We talked about not spending so much time making sure that you working and reworking these features. You want to put out your feature, your product as quickly as possible. As we say that though, this is not what you want to be doing. Uh, this is not it. It should still be usable. What's at the bottom is what you're going for. Minimum features, but can still do the job, basically. That's what you want to do. What are we going to look at today? We're going to talk about the development process as you build your MVP. We'll then talk about anti-patterns. When we talk about anti-patterns, we're looking at how you would do things in a startup versus how big enterprises would do them. And if you're someone coming from working at a big enterprise and you see how you end up having to do them in a startup, it can be a bit nerve-wracking because enterprises have their own way. But we're going to look at these anti-patterns and talk about why they exist with a startup and why they're okay. And maybe you don't need to panic so much. And then we'll look at architectures, typical architectures that you would follow when you're building this MVP on AWS. And then we'll talk about core foundations. Now we talked about the development process. First thing we're going to talk about here is iterations. All of this goes back to you want to get your product out there as quickly as possible. So this is a process, but you want to be quick. So you're iterating, you are building, you are designing, building, deploying, measuring iteratively. Very quickly you are doing this. You are incrementally giving value to your customer. And that is the development iteration that you actually want to follow. So what a methodology that tends to be followed with this development process that helps with this is sprints. They get used by development teams quite a lot. And what are sprints? Sprints are very small bursts of work. They should be complete, they should be uninterrupted, and they should be short. So when I say complete, it's a sprint of work that is preceded by planning and is followed by a retrospective. A retrospective is when you're looking back and you are reflecting on what you actually did, what worked well and what did not work well. It's complete. There was planning and you did the work, and then you're looking back on what you did. It should be uninterrupted. As a founder, you have continuously all these ideas around how you can build this product and how it can actually go better. With that, there is a temptation to want to interrupt your team because you've got this new idea. You want them to try this out. You need to resist the temptation to do that. So the sprint should be uninterrupted. You want it to be short because you want to get your feature out there as quickly as possible. There aren't definitive timelines around this, but we talk about a week to 2 weeks as being ideal because going back to that slide we saw from the co-founder of LinkedIn, you don't want to rework a feature. You want to get out there as quickly as possible so that you can get that feedback from your customer as quickly as possible, and then you can start your iteration process all over again. So that's your sprint, and that's a methodology that you could follow as you build your MVP, you're building that product. So this is what you want to make sure of as you're doing that planning that goes into how you're going to run your sprint. Everything that you're going to be doing will seem important to you, but you now need to make sure that you prioritize what gets done in each sprint. It's very easy for you to want to do everything in one go, but what you want to do then, if any feature starts to look very big, you want to start breaking it down into many features that can follow in your sprints that will come after that. So this is what you want to avoid. At the what I've just clicked on at the bottom right corner, you don't want to spend time on features that have low impact, even if they are fast to build, because you want to build for impact so that you can get that feedback from your customer. This next corner, top right, is what you definitely want to be spending all your time on. It has high impact. It is fast for you to build. And you also slow to build, high impact, but slow to build. You then want to break down, like we've already talked about. And then low impact, slow to build, undifferentiated. You definitely want to stay away from this one. So your planning will then look into all of this, and this is how you would group the features and all those ideas that you are coming up with as you are building your MVP. Carrying on from the previous slide, you want to minimize the size of your task. You want to minimize it so much that one engineer can actually handle a task, that the task is done in one single sprint, and that you add incremental value. You can prioritize very easily, and you can reduce scope so that you remove ambiguity. You remove ambiguity in terms of what needs to be done to get that feature out, and you remove ambiguity in the feature itself. So that's what you want to focus on. This all goes into your planning before you start the building. And now what happens during the sprint? There are stand-ups. And what you need to aim for with your stand-up is that they are conducted every day. First thing in the morning is what I've seen actually being carried out the most. We've seen this in our customers, and in my past as a developer, it's what I used to take part in. The first thing in the morning, and you make sure that a person per person does not get to speak for more than 1 minute. Already it speaks again to what are they doing. If they're talking for too much, are they maybe working on a feature that's too big, or are they maybe not clear with what they're working on? Is there ambiguity there? So that's what you want to aim for. And everyone takes part in this stand-up. Your tech team is there, your product is there, your marketing is there, and your business is there. Everyone owns this product that you've built. He owns this feature, and maximum 15 minutes for the entire stand-up. And now you've built your product. You want to ship it out. You want to continuously ship your releases. And this is when we start talking about what services we have on AWS that can help you with this. We've got various services that we could look at that help you do that continuous shipping of your features. There's a service known as Code Star. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail around this, but what it actually does is it has a lot of mini services that help you with that entire pipeline. You have services within Code Star that help you where you can host your source code, services that help you build your source code. You can integrate with third-party tools for your testing of what you've built, and then you can use another service on AWS that then helps you deploy that feature that you've just built. That's your entire pipeline. What you also want to look at and integrate very early on, infrastructure as code. So your developers, uh, as you provision your infrastructure and everything else that you need around your product, you want to make sure this is automated and there's no clicking on the console. Very early on, you want to do this because what it also helps you with is to minimize errors as well. So what you then deploy on development and on testing and on production, it's all the same because you've used infrastructure as code. So that's another thing you want to consider very early on as you've now started to build your product. So we looked at the development process, and now we're going to talk about anti-patterns. We mentioned before early on that these would go against what you would normally see at an enterprise, but it tends to happen with a startup. So just as the early stages of building a business are unique compared to as your business grows, the same is true for technology that you build early on. There are a few anti-patterns, like I already said, compared to what you would see at a late stage startup as well, or an enterprise. So the first anti-pattern that you would see is this one: how you prioritize your roadmap as an early stage startup. If you look at the size of these dots, or if you look at the size of these dots, imagine that each dot represents a feature and that the size of a dot represents the time it takes to build that feature. Remember when we looked a couple of slides back, we talked about that quadrant. You look at what's going to take too long, and then you start to break that down. You don't want the big dots to be very early on as you build, because these are going to take up a lot of time for you. Because what you want to do is to make sure that you go out there as quickly as possible so that you can have that impact, and then you can have that return on value of what you've built. So you save the bigger dots for later on as much as possible, and the smaller dots would be at the beginning. So it's a consideration for an early stage startup that probably would not be a consideration for anybody else. The bigger dots could be later on. And the other mistake that sometimes can happen at an early stage is that you worry about features that are not needed now. You move those to the end, close to the end, even if the dot is not so big. You don't need them right now, so you move them to the end. So that's the first anti-pattern. It's how you prioritize your roadmap. The next one is startups really fail because of the software that could not scale. It really is the thing that you need to worry about. So what you need to worry about and focus on is that you are building the features that your users are asking for. Scaling is something that will be taken care of for you on AWS. We've got services that later on we will look at that will help you do that scaling. All you are focusing on is those features and building that product for your customer. And then we hear about technical debt. Enterprises, big enterprises, it's a word you don't even mention, technical debt. With an early stage startup, it is something that might be difficult for you to avoid. Very early on, you are testing a couple of things, a lot of things actually. It is very possible that what you build in the beginning, you won't even use later on. You will change it completely and not even recognize it later on. So technical debt then becomes something that's inevitable. What you also don't want to do is to have your development team worrying about avoiding and removing technical debt, because what you want them to spend time on is building that feature, is building that product for your customer. You're building in the cloud on AWS, it is not something that you will worry very much about. There are ways we will look later on how you could minimize it. But as an early stage startup, it can be something that you don't really, you won't really be able to avoid. So that's another anti-pattern. And carrying on technical debt as an anti-pattern, you need to start accepting that you will have to treat technical debt, MVP, as an acceptable cost to moving quickly. This is another thing. You want to move quickly, so it will be there. It is par for the course. You will hear people say. So that is the other anti-pattern that you will hear about. And this is what we hear. If you build it, you must maintain it. And what we mean by this, or what we're trying to say by this, is you don't provision anything that you don't want to be spending time maintaining. And this relates a lot around things like infrastructure. Don't want to be spending so much time on provisioning infrastructure, because then you have to maintain that. This is where, when I mention infrastructure as code, it plays into that as well. There are other services that we're going to look at on AWS that make sure that you stay away from this. what you want to be focusing on as a startup is that product. That is the message throughout. That's what you want to worry about. So you don't build it if you don't want to be maintaining it. So you want to build less so that you can deliver more. The less you build, the less that is there for you to maintain. So then what you end up with is you will have more to deliver to your user. You don't want to be focusing so much time on undifferentiated lifting because it's hard for you to scale with this. And there are services on AWS that you can leverage that help you not have to build things that you don't want to be building. So looking at this quadrant again, we've got this block here which says we have services on AWS that help you not have to provision infrastructure. What this means then is that you don't have infrastructure that you have to worry about managing. You pay for value, so you don't provision anything that you don't need, because if it's there, you're paying for it. You also will be able to scale automatically. I mentioned before that all you need to worry about is building that product. Will help you with scale as you get more customers. There are services that help you with this, and there are architectures that can actually help you build this into the product. And then what you want to make sure is that you have high availability of your product and that your product is secure. Again, we've got services that help you with this. What you also want to be doing when you are building your product is that you want to optimize for learning. This is optimizing for learning for your customer, for your user. You want to make sure that they can learn, and this is for you now that you're prototyping and that you are doing experiments. This is for you optimizing for learning. So now we're done with the anti-patterns, and I said there are architectures that you can leverage as a start that take advantage of these other benefits that you get on the AWS cloud. So what architectures are these? What are the typical architectures? First one that we're going to look at, and if there are any of you in the audience that are developers and you hear me say monoliths are okay, you're probably thinking, what on earth are you talking about? How can you say monoliths are okay? Monoliths are okay when you start. What is a monolith? Monolith is that piece of code that does everything. It can sound like a swear word because legacy applications long time ago, before we got object-oriented programming, uh, were monoliths. They were by design monoliths, but as a start, they're okay. And starting with a monolith is often the right choice. It allows you for fast development. That's why we say it's okay as a start. It helps you develop fast as an early stage, at an early stage of your product development, because you don't need to know all your boundaries ahead of time. Because if you want to break a monolith up, you need to know those boundaries, then you know when to break. Now, in the beginning, you don't know what those boundaries are. And even if you know where they are, maybe you don't have time to be spending on breaking them. So as a start, monoliths are okay. A very well designed monolith can be scaled horizontally and broken apart later if you need to do that. Some startups will never even outgrow the scaling capacity of a well-designed monolith. And adding features to a monolith is usually quick because there's one place where you need to do it. I know that there are disadvantages to that as well. But we'll talk about other architecture patterns later on. And services on AWS, if you are bringing a monolith on, we have a service that is called Amazon Light Sail. That's there in the corner. That is the name of the service. It's the easiest way to get started. What Light Sail will provide you is computing power on AWS. So it's like a very small server on AWS. It will provide you with DNS management. You can provision or ask for one static IP or instance. You get networking and data transfer. You can create a larger instance later on, so you can provision very small computing power when you start, and then you ask for a much larger instance later on as your application grows or as your user base grows. You can attach block storage to your application on Lightsail, so it integrates with other services on AWS as well. You can have load balancing of your application, and you can connect to other AWS services on Lightsail. So very small, easy way to get started if you have a monolith application on AWS. So you can bring websites. Very common use of Amazon Lightsail is people hosting their websites, like your WordPress website, your Magento, Joomla, those websites, and you can host a web application. You can host a web application with configured development stacks like LAMP, websites, web applications, Nginx, Min, and Node.js. And then that way you can then make your web application available online. So that's the first service that we have for monolith applications. Another service that we have on AWS that can help you deploy and scale a monolith is called AWS Elastic Beanstalk. What we're looking at here is a typical architecture. What is Elastic Beanstalk? First, before we look at the architecture, I'm not going to go into very much technical detail, but first, what is Elastic Beanstalk? Elastic Beanstalk is an easy-to-use service for deploying and scaling your web applications and services that are developed with Java, with .NET, PHP, Node.js, Python, the list goes on. You can upload your code, and Elastic Beanstalk then will take care of the deployment. It will take care of the capacity provisioning, of the load balancing for you, of the auto scaling of your application and your health monitoring. At the same time, what you get is that you get to retain full control over the AWS resource powering your application, and you can access the underlying resources at any time. So this is great for your monolith. You get access to your underlying resources, but going back to, if you build it, you maintain it, you will think, and you will have to think around this and think about the trade-offs. What are you looking for at the time? Are you happy with maintaining that underlying resources? There are other services that we will look at later on where you will have no access or need to touch your underlying resources. So this would be a typical architecture that you would then follow. This is a highly available architecture. Elastic Beanstalk is over 2 availability zones, which are like data centers. So this then allows you to bring in load balancing. It allows you to bring in auto scaling, and you get to do that with your instances that host your application and the databases that are behind your application. So we're looking at a monolith and how you would host that. And now we're going to look at microservices. This is another typical architecture that you could follow, architecture pattern. This is the opposite of the monolith that we talked about before. So how would you host a microservice on AWS, and what is a microservice? Microservices are a great way to build and scale your applications when you understand the boundaries between services. Monoliths were when you don't understand the boundaries as yet. So now you understand them, you've broken down, so you've got one microservices per thing. So microservices do one thing. Each service is tasked with doing one thing and doing it very well. So you've got a service, looking at what we're looking at here, you've got one that does, let's say, a banking app. One service is printing statements. One is for when they are viewing their balances. One is sending notifications. So it's doing one thing and doing it well. Um, uh, this is especially helpful when you're expecting load from your users. This is when you would then go to microservices. Also, as your development team grows, microservices are a great way to keep your development velocity high. You can have a developer working on a service, unlike with a monolith, because if one person is maintaining that, everything stops for everyone else because you've got one big blob of code. Here you can actually break up your development team, and also as you break up your services or your features. So that's another architecture pattern that you could consider. Now, building your APIs on AWS, you've got your microservices. Now you want to expose them to your customer. So you could publish them as an API on AWS. So what you're looking at are typical services that you would have on AWS. I would let you do this. AWS Lambda is where you would typically host your backend. Amazon API Gateway is where you are publishing your API. Later on, you could extend your application. You now can put in a web application for your customer. You can insert authentication of your users using Amazon Cognito. You can insert block storage using Amazon Simple Storage Service. As you're building more features onto your application, you leverage a new service that does whatever that new thing that you're introducing is. Like I've talked about block storage on Amazon S3. It could be that when your application started out, as an example, you were not let me think of an example. Say you have a website where you are sharing recipes to your users. Later on, you could decide that you want the community of your users to also upload their own recipes. So then you would insert a service like Amazon Simple Storage, because then this lets them do the upload, and then it stores photos of whatever they've uploaded. That's an example that you could think of. So as your application grows, as you build on more features, more services that are available for you to leverage. Again, as you grow, you could introduce more services. Your application is now also available on a mobile. With that, you slot in more AWS services. I have there any AWS service, depending on whatever feature you want to introduce, you could just slot in. That's what the microservice architecture lets you do. And this is you exposing those microservices as APIs. And this is what also is known as the serverless services on AWS. When I talked about Lightsail and Elastic Beanstalk before, those are not serverless. When I talked about Elastic Beanstalk, I said you've got access to the underlying resources. You can maintain them. That's great. You've got access if you want that access. But now, because it's there, it means you have to maintain it. With serverless, you are not maintaining any of those underlying infrastructure. AWS is maintaining those for you. You are bringing your code, and off you go. So that's typically how you would build an API on AWS. Another typical architecture that we see our customers leverage is when they have a mobile application. The previous slide, I looked at a service known as the API Gateway. There's another one that is known as AWS AppSync. This is for your GraphQL, exposing your APIs as GraphQL on AWS. You could slot in another service for databases, Amazon Aurora. These are all just typical examples. Another typical service you could leverage is Amazon CloudFront. This is for serving your application. So typical architectures that you could leverage. As you grow, as your application grows, you can slot in more services. Amazon DynamoDB is for your NoSQL databases. Another service, we already looked at Amazon Cognito for authenticating for your users. So as you grow, you find a new service to leverage, and this helps you build a lot quicker because all the services are very independent but can still work together. Say you have a static or single page web application and you want to host it as a serverless web application on AWS. What would you actually leverage? We looked at Elastic Beanstalk and Lightsail, and these were your websites and web applications, but you were provisioning the infrastructure to host them. So what if you don't want to provision the infrastructure to host them? There is a service known as Aws Amplify. It's an alternative to where you are now, to where you were provisioning infrastructure. So what is Amplify is it's a serverless way of hosting your front end and your back end of your application on AWS. There are three easy steps to get going. You connect your repository, where your source is actually hosted, could be on AWS already or on GitHub, and you configure your build settings and you deploy your application. It's those three easy steps. So every time then your source code changes and you push onto the GitHub repo or whatever your repository, the build is automatically done for you. It starts going. And when you work with this, you actually never believe. I say quick and easy, and people always warn against using such words. And I'm not a very technical person, and I can say quick and easy because when I first used it, I could not believe how quick and easy it was. So there's another service you could leverage on AWS. Other services you could leverage, say you are bringing your application on containers onto AWS. We have services that help you with that as well. We already looked at AWS Elastic Beanstalk. There are services like Elastic Container Service for your Docker containers, Elastic Container Service for Kubernetes, EKS. Fargate is your serverless way of provisioning your infrastructure for your ECS and your EKS that I just talked about. And you've got your registry and your app mesh, which is how you would publish or expose that application. So just some of the typical services that we have. Let's say you you want to perform analytics, or you are doing analytics in your application. What do you have available on AWS? So when you are ingesting large amounts of data or building analytics products, it's advisable that you build architecture that is specific to that task. Again, you don't want to be building something that is not a feature. So you want to leverage whatever already exists for what you want. So you want analytics, we've got services for that. So you could have this example that we're looking at here. You are collecting events from your web or your mobile applications, and these events are then sent to Amazon Kinesis, which then you have Amazon Kinesis data firehose that then takes these events and sends them to Amazon S3. And from here on, from S3 onwards, is where you can plug in other services that would then do the analytics for you. Services like Amazon Athena, Amazon QuickSight for your dashboards, and I've plugged in Amazon API Gateway, which we already looked at, CloudFront for serving your web application. And as you grow and you want to include more capabilities, we've got Amazon Pinpoint for your payments, CloudWatch alarms if you want to start setting up alarms. What this shows is that there are services as your product grows, as you want to build more features, also services as your user base grows. So we've looked at the development process, at the entry patterns as an early stage startup, at typical architectures that you could leverage as you're starting out on AWS, as you're building your product. Now we're going to look at core foundations. Software can be rebuilt, and often it is a lengthy process to do this. There are specific decisions that you need to make sure that you get right at the beginning. These are very important decisions, and usually these are decisions that are not easy to undo or go back and fix. So these you need to get right at the beginning. What I mean by this is you don't want to overinvest where it's difficult to change. You want to invest where it's not so difficult to change. Some decisions that you make now will stick around for a very long time. What you need to know is when a decision is a one-way door or a two-way door. We learn about that a lot at Amazon. We talk about that a lot. When you join here, you learn a lot about one-way and two-way door decisions. This is what helps you make those decisions very quickly. So this is what determines, can I undo this? If I can undo, maybe I don't have to overthink it. I can go and do it. But if I can't undo it, so it is a one-way door, then maybe I need to spend a lot more time thinking around it. And following slides, we're going to look at what these are. What are these decisions that are not easy to undo? So you need to spend a little bit more time. Make sure you build them very upfront. This is something like security. Again, we talk about here at Amazon, we like to talk about security being job zero. It's job zero for you as well for your application. You need to think about this very early on as you build your application. And we have this slide is not even all the services available that help you do this. We were talking about Cognito a lot for authentication of your customer, of your user on your application. A couple of slides back, it's a security service, and there's a couple long list of others as well. These you need to consider very early on. What you also need to invest time in very early on is integration points. These are how your user actually gets to relate, connect, and get to know your application. This is things like documentation. You need to invest in that very early on. Specifications of your APIs where you are exposing them, you need to invest in that. You need to write tutorials, videos, quick starts that help your customer get going very quickly, help your user know your system and get to work with it very quickly, very early on. So your core foundations. Something else that is a core foundation, data choices last longer than many other. So you need to put in extra time. This will pay off for you in the long run. There are many different data models and stores on AWS, depending on a use case. And there are AWS services that support a use case for the data model. So we have relational data stores, we have in-memory data stores, document, graph, ledger, key value, any type of data store that you're looking for your use case. And we have a service that goes with that. So something else that you need to invest in. You will see on this slide, there is a QR code. If you access this, you will be able to watch more videos on how you can build an MVP on AWS. I did not even go into so much detail here or too much technical detail, just we don't have time. So you can look at those and you can learn more. And the last slide is, thank you for inviting me here today. And again, you can find me on Twitter. And that QR code now, this is the second QR code, and this is the survey that I would appreciate if you completed. Let me know how useful was this session today, what I said here today. If not very useful, how we can actually help make these kind of sessions more useful for you going forward. And also I will share in the chat. These slides are available for you. I've got a speaker deck already that you will be able to access, and you can go through these slides in your own time. Again, thank you for inviting me here today.
Thank you so much, Feliswa. I think definitely learned a lot throughout the session. So thank you so much for joining us today and taking us through through what AWS has to offer us as entrepreneurs. At the moment, I've got two questions that popped up in the chat, and then we'll also go through some of the questions that that was shared during the registration. The first question is from Paul. She asks, what if I have already passed that stage into a prototype, but the relationship with the developer fails and the project has been abandoned? Can I still follow the same procedure with the new developers, i.e. AWS?
Yes, because what you are thinking about the entire time your feature is its own thing. How do I explain it? Short answer is yes, because you are iterating on the same behaviors. Yeah, maybe that's the best way to actually explain it. You are iterating on the same behavior as you are building these new features. It's a new feature, but it's the same behaviors as you iterate on them all the time. So yes, you can start from scratch.
Thank you. And then another question from Zintle asking, does one need, and I think there's been a couple of questions as well about this, does one need advanced coding skills to build an MVP on AWS?
Typically, so maybe you're asking as a founder who's also writing the code, but you would typically have a development team. So those would typically be developers. So there would be advanced developer coding skills. But we have services on AWS that don't need very intricate developer skills. We have no-code services as well. We've got a service, Amazon Honeycode, that you can build an application without writing any code. That was announced, I think, in 2019. So, but it's very, very, very small applications that don't do a lot. So yes, quick answer is you don't always need one. And what I always share with people is when I learned AWS, I was not a developer. And there are various options depending on how hectic of a developer you are. Some things you can do just on the console, some you write code. So it depends. But you don't always need to be.
Right. So that's good to know for some of us non-coders.
Yeah.
So at least we can try the no-code option. We can also try teach
Yeah.
ourselves, and this is a bit for
Yeah.
both of us. Thanks so
Yes.
much. I've got a question here from Dominique. It says some country regulations can restrict usage of the cloud for applications. If you build on AWS and you have this issue, then should we I suppose then how do we accommodate for local deployment?
That tends to be a worry with a lot of institutions, especially your financial and your health institutions, because around regulations, exactly what you've asked. And we have the concept on AWS of regions. So data that needs to reside in a certain region, you can actually deploy in that region. I know before I joined AWS, I used to work for a bank here in South Africa. There is data that cannot leave these borders. And before we had the Cape Town region, AWS, now we have a region in Cape Town, so you can deploy your application there. It delayed a lot of the projects we wanted to do because at the time we're using, everyone in South Africa, we had to use Ireland. And for some of the applications, you cannot be outside South Africa. So there was a delay. And when Cape Town happened as a region, it actually accelerated that adoption for a lot of these enterprises. So yes, we've got the concept of regions, which helps you put the code where you want to put it. Also, it helps you bring the application closer to where your user is. So yeah, you can.
Okay, great. I think that's good to know for some of our entrepreneurs. I know we've got quite a few that are based in East Africa, West Africa, as well as SADC region. I have a question here. What are the typical costs for using AWS services? I know there's also been questions as well about what does it cost to use AWS services, using developer tools, building an MVP, etc.
I don't know if you have had a session with Henry yet, Henry Zitzman, or if you're going to have a session with him, because he's on the business side and he would talk with you around AWS Activate, which is a program that we have for startups. And here we provide things like AWS credits that help you build your MVP without spending money. Everything you're leveraging those credits. There are various forms to help you get going without spending in the beginning. Pricing per service, I would have to share a link per service for you to look at what pricing looks like. And we won't be able to do that today, but very long story short, our business team can actually provide you with solution architects, and you could go through the entire putting together your architecture, and out of that determining the pricing for building that product.
Right. Thanks so much, Feliswa. And I suppose that that will then be a segue for myself there in terms of AWS credits. And as a Tech Tribe community member, we do value, or as a Tech Tribe community, we value your growth, and we want to hold your hand in that journey. As I mentioned earlier, we understand that it can be long and it can be lonely, but as a Tech Tribe community, we want to hold your hand alongside our partners at AWS. And so what we are offering our members of the community are AWS credits, AWS Activate credits, that you can make use of to build your MVP, as it were, or to use any of the other AWS tools that are available. And we will have a session with Henry in I think in about 4 weeks, where we will he will take us through the process of AWS and how to access those, how to make use of those credits, how the business support works, etc. So please keep an eye out in your inbox for that session. Keep an eye out on our social media as well, or our newsletter for when that session will be. And there will be a mail going out later today, where it will also just outline how you can access the credits that we are offering in collaboration with AWS. If there are no other questions, I think we will call it a day. I'm just gonna, just quickly check if we've got any more questions from anyone. Yes, the recording will be made available after this, and we will share with you all. Feliswa, on behalf of the Tech Tribe Community SA Innovation Summit and our attendees, like to thank you so much for the session today. I think it was very valuable and very useful. I know we've got some entrepreneurs, some founders as well that are still building their MVP, and I think this will be very useful for them. So thank you so much. We really do appreciate it. And to all our attendees, please keep an eye out. We've got a session next week with Estonia's e-residency program, learning how we can scale our business into the European market. So that's also a very exciting session. As I mentioned before, we will have another session with AWS in November. So keep an eye out for that. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Feliswa. Have a lovely day.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.